Dobar večer, dragi gledatelji. Izvanredni opunomoćeni veleposlanik države Izrael u Republici Hrvatskoj, Gary Cohen. Večeras je moj gost. Dobar večer, dobrodošli i hvala vam lijepo na vašem vremenu.
Dobro večer.
Vi ste, ja mislim, ne znam koji, neću ni brojati, veleposlanik Izraela koji je rado se odazvao na moj poziv i dio pitanja je uvijek jednak jer dio pitanja, dakle, perenira, dio problema perenira. Ali pokušat ćemo ovaj razgovor ipak nekako osvježiti, no, naravno, novim pitanjima. No, poneprije, budući da ste u Hrvatskoj novi veleposlanik Izraela, koji su vaši dojmovi o Hrvatskoj?
Well, thank you very much, first of all, for having me here on your program. I'm almost 6 months in Croatia. However, I'm more than 35 years in the business of diplomacy. It's my fourth time to be ambassador. I think it's a great honor to work in any country, in this case also in Republic of Croatia. We enjoy excellent relations. Of course, it's a direct contribution of my predecessors on the Israeli side, but also on Croatian side, our colleagues who work in Israel. So I'll try to bring my experience to do things maybe a little bit differently from the perspective that I bring, but definitely for the sake of the betterment of the relations between our countries and cooperation between companies, artists, scientists, common people.
Možda ovo prilika, jer je ovo vaš inauguralni nastup u ovoj formi od 50 minuta, dakle gotovo cijeli sat, da vas naša publika bolje upozna. Pa evo, predstavite se, kad ste kazali da ste dugo već u tom poslu diplomacije, gdje ste sve bili i kako je tekla ta vaša biografija veleposlanika i diplomata?
Well, I think half of my time, more than half of my time, like most of the diplomats, in any diplomatic service, I spent abroad, working abroad, different positions, as a junior diplomat, later as a senior, as ambassador, as I mentioned. I think if there is something unique for my personal background, is a fact that I was born in the Soviet Union. I was born in Latvia, Riga. Now it's an independent state, part of EU, part of NATO. But I was born in Soviet times, and I'm always be thankful to my late parents for making Aliyah. Aliyah means repatriation, which is open to any Jewish people who want to move to Israel. We did it back in 1973. 30 years later, in 2003, I came back to Riga as Israeli ambassador. So it was, I would say, one interesting, unique part of my career. The second will be actually regarding our relations with the Russian Federation. As a young diplomat, I arrived to Moscow, to the Soviet Union, to the Soviet Moscow in 1991. And I worked there 3 years. And I came back to Moscow second time as ambassador. That was my previous ambassadorial job, 2017 to 2018. So it's quite a perspective regarding relations that we had. And this is one of my strongest expertise. Like many diplomats in foreign services, normally they have some expertise. Some are experts in Latin America, some are Orientalist experts in Arab countries, some experts for Africa and so on. My expertise is mostly former Soviet Union space. Yeah, but I'm glad to be here.
U ovoj situaciji imat ćemo, dakle, o čemu pričati, to tim više što ste vi bili pri dolasku u Hrvatsku na krivone, dakle, kažem, zamjenik glavnog direktora za Euroaziju i odjela za Zapadni Balkan u Izraelskom ministarstvu vanjskih poslova. Kako se Izrael postavlja u ovoj situaciji, dakle, glede rata u Ukrajini, naročito nakon ruskog povezivanja sa Iranom?
Yeah. Well, first of all, just to mention that indeed, until arriving to Zagreb in my position as ambassador, I covered former Soviet Union, what we call Eurasia in kind of neutral, semi-geographical historical jargon, and the Western Balkans, mostly the neighbors of Croatia. Regarding Ukraine, regarding the war in Ukraine, last week Foreign Minister Eli Cohen visited Kiev. I met with President Zelensky and with Foreign Minister Kuleba. I think it shows beyond any doubt our commitment and our support of Ukraine and people of Ukraine. Foreign Minister Eli Cohen reiterated also our position for the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Ukraine. Israel, when the war started, and I had direct involvement in dealing with immediate situation regarding evacuation of our diplomats, families, but also many thousands of Israelis who worked in Ukraine. And we led a tremendous effort, which is continuing right now as well, and will continue as it will be needed, regarding humanitarian assistance in very substantial quantities in different fields, whether it's strong, big generators or food or water. We established a hospital in Ukraine that worked there for a few months in the beginning of the war. So, and we support Ukraine, of course, very much in United Nations in votes.
Za vas to nije bila najjednostavnija situacija. Sjećam se, dakle, vaš je prethodnik bio Ilan Mor, s njim sam razgovarao, ali sa gospođom ambasadorica sam razgovarao prije, dakle, gospodina Mora. Expressis verbis je kazala da su naročito dobri odnosi sa Rusijom i Izrael je njegovao i njeguje tako posebne odnose sa Rusijom i ovaj rat nije najjednostavnija stvar za Izrael. Sada ste kazali u zadnjoj rečenici, vi snažno podupirete nedvosmisleno Ukrajinu, ali od vas se zahtijevalo u jednom trenutku stanovito oružje. Dakle, postojale su posebne situacije. Kako se zapravo Izrael nosi sa tim dvostrukim na neki način zahtjevom da održi normalne, da ne kažem dobre odnose sa Rusijom, a sa druge strane, eto, da se angažira na strani saveznika i svih onih koji snažno podupiru Ukrajinu?
Well, first of all, it's important to understand that Israel located quite a distance from the theater of war, and Israel is facing direct threats on its own existence. So we have our own issues, our own problems, and we have strong military and strong capacity to deal with the issues that we are facing directly. For us, always was important, beyond the military side of the equation, strategic equation, is to have good relations with many countries as possible, especially countries that their activities may have a direct impact on our security. Russia is the case. Russia was always involved since the Soviet times in what's happening in the Middle East, including through military presence and involvement in neighboring countries. It was in the Soviet time, in Syria and Egypt. Now it's mostly in Syria, okay? So we have to take this very much into account. There are Russian troops, if you like, on our border, northern part of Israel, Golan Heights. There is Russian airplanes in the sky of Syria. There are Russian ships in the Mediterranean. So it's something that we have to take into account, mostly because of the Iranian presence in Syria, and our need to deal with this presence and with the threat that emanates from Iranian presence against Israel in Syria. So this is one part of the equation that makes the need for keeping coordination with Moscow, keeping contacts very much open. I was dealing with that almost on a daily basis when I worked in Moscow. The second issue is connected to Ukraine and to Russia. Israel is a Jewish state. It's a homeland for Jewish people. We care very much about Jewish diaspora. I hear as well people in Croatia care about Croatians who live whether on the other side of the border, in Bosnia and Herzegovina, or maybe even Canada, Chile, and other places. We understand this. You care for your own. We have almost 200,000 people of Jewish descent who live in Ukraine. We have almost 500,000 people of Jewish descent who live in Russia. So this is something unique. It was and it will always be part of the Israeli diplomacy, taking into account the interests also of the Jewish communities.
Kako kao čovjek koji ste, evo spomenuli ste Rigu kao svoje rodno mjesto, dakle tu zemlju kao naprosto rodni kraj, iako ste Židov Izraelac, kako gledate na sve te razgovore i nagovještaje moguće prijetnje baltičkim zemljama i kad razgovarate sa svojim prijateljima, a zasigurno ih imate tamo i to ne samo prijateljima koje su eto, u svakodnevnim poslovima, nego prijateljima koji su u diplomaciji ili možda u vojnim službama, etc. Kako oni procjenjuju realnu opasnost i kakva je atmosfera u tim zemljama kada je riječ o toj mogućoj prijetnji?
Well, recently I don't have such conversations. Again, I switched totally. You know, you cannot live in this gap, continue dealing with the affairs that I was in charge in headquarters and before that as ambassador in Moscow, and still doing my best for standing the relations for Croatia. I think what's happening, it's quite understandable. Again, please understand us. We are not part of NATO. We are not part of EU. So our observation, I'm not saying it's less valid or less objective, whatever, but I think it's quite normal to understand countries who geographically are close to the conflict, close to the war. Some of your neighbors to the European Union, definitely, whether it's Hungary, Poland, or Romania, or Baltic states that you mentioned. Of course, the impact of war on those countries is much significant, and concerns are much more significant. But as watchers from outside, I think what plays a significant role for the security and the confidence of those countries is that they are part of the large family of European countries. They can rely on support. They're also members of NATO, which makes things, of course, very much different in a positive sense for them, for the sense of the security. But still, I guess there is a difference between living in the eastern part of Europe and living somewhere in the western part. Yeah.
Kakav je utjecaj ukrajinskih izbjeglica na izraelsko društvo?
Okay,
mislim, da pojasnim našim gledateljima, ne vama, pa jasno, ali vi ste primili puno ljudi iz Ukrajine.
Yeah, it's important, I think, to clarify, because when I was dealing with the operation of evacuation of our people from Ukraine and Israeli citizens, not only diplomats and their families, we watched, of course, very much having Israeli diplomats on all major crossing points with Ukraine. We have seen this stream of refugees coming, and we are very much, as Ukrainian people, very much thankful, of course, to the immediate neighborhood countries like Poland, Romania, and Hungary. We know, of course, that also in Croatia you have a few thousands of those refugees. Israel doesn't have a border, so people who arrive to Israel, they already came from Europe or they came from places of work or vacation. Some of them even came from Abu Dhabi, okay, or Egypt. So we do have few thousand refugees. We do have few thousand Ukrainian workers who had permits and worked in Israel, contributing significantly to our economy, whether it was construction sector or other sectors. Those people were allowed to stay, even if their visas finished. And what's unique in the case of Israel, that last year we had 15,000 Jewish people, or people of Jewish descent, who came from Ukraine, okay? It's a substantial number as well. And I guess 2023, as long as the war continues, unfortunately, we will continue receiving this stream of people who will be coming. most of them to find a home in Israel, a new home, because being of Jewish descent, or some of them probably will go back, because as you know, the men are drafted and they stay there. And for many people, there is an issue of property, business, education, and many humanitarian issues which are common to the whole situation.
Nedavno je formirana vlada sa novim starim premijerom Benjaminom Netanjahuom. Recite mi, je li ovakav izborni rezultat bio očekivan?
Well, it's a good question. I would say it's a tough question. I think at any given moment, there is almost equality, okay, in Israeli public. I think traditionally, the state, there was a kind of rotation until, let's say, 20 plus years ago, or even more, when the late Menachem Begin was victorious and brought Herut Likud to as a ruling party. But basically, we have the situation of almost equality between the parties, and all the polls that were just ahead of the final results couldn't very much predict. So it's not a surprise. It's not a total surprise. I think we will have now a much more stable government, also numerically having 64 mandates out of 120. It doesn't mean that there are no issues. Okay, right now there are some issues, some debates in Israel, even some demonstrations, but the government is in the hands of very experienced politician, in this case, Benjamin Netanyahu.
U jednoj rečenici ste kazali demonstracije i tako dalje, ali upoznajmo malo Izrael. U ovom trenutku ide prekrasan serijal mog kolege Gorana Milića, nevjerovatnog čovjeka koji je u svakom svojem putovanju sve bolji i bolji, ili eto sazrijeva, još je mlad pa sazrijeva, mada ima 70 godina, ali briljantno prikazuje Izrael. Ali saznamo nešto dubinski o politici Izraela. Protiv čega, dakle, se protestira kad se tjednima protestira protiv nove vlade?
Okay. Yeah, first of all, it's important to understand that Israel is the only democracy in the Middle East. It's a true democracy, very vivid, very energetic, and people arguing all the time. You know, to some extent, I'm not sure how much politicians argue in Sabo, but Israeli debates were always with a lot of energy. I think we're not in the business of competition, how many parties. We have more than a dozen parties in our parliament, but it reflects a strong pluralism, first of all, okay, and strong commitment to democracy. The arguments right now, mostly in the field of reform in judicial system, okay? I will not go into details, not because I'm a civil servant, but mostly because it's an open issue. I would like to say that now that we speak here in the studio, this evening Prime Minister Netanyahu meets with the head of opposition, Yair Lapid, in a parliament, in the Knesset, in order to see if it's possible to bridge the gaps, to bridge let's say, the disagreements, and to work on a formula that was proposed by our president, Isaac Herzog, a few days ago. Hopefully, as a citizen of Israel, I hope that this divide will be bridged, and we will find some kind of consensus that will be workable for two sides, for those who are for strengthening the role of government over the role of the judiciary, and for those who would like to ensure that the judiciary will stay independent, which is one of the important factors of democracy.
To je izuzetno dobro kad postoji taj gap između, vječno otvoren gap između društvenih, dakle, skupina, kad postoji konflikt, jer to svjedoči upravo toj živosti demokracije i živosti društva. Možete nam nešto objasniti o karakteru, dakle, stanovnika u najširem smislu Židova, jer oni dolaze iz raznih skupina, raznih zemalja, s raznim povijesnim iskustvima itd. itd. Mi znamo i vi sad govorite kako postoji taj konflikt u parlamentu, kako postoji živa javna diskusija, demonstracije itd. Ali prema van, čovjek bi rekao da nema monolitnijeg naroda i da je to bila pretpostavka održanja Židova tijekom svih ovih tisućljeća od Židova. Otkud ta, s jedne strane, jedinstvenost, a sa druge strane to unutarnje previranje i stalna diskusija? Te u kojem trenutku se desi to pomirenje?
I think on one thing you can find almost full consensus when it comes to the issues of security. Of course, when I mention pluralistic societies, it's important to mention that it's not monolithic. Okay, we have a Jewish majority of 80% approximately. And we have also Muslims, and we have a little bit of Christians and other religions. But if you look only on the Jewish part, you will see, I wouldn't call it a divide, but still people that are traditionally more religious, observant. You have secular people, like most of the Western countries, and you have very much Orthodox Jewish communities. And each community, through its elected representatives in our parliament, is trying to work out better terms for their own need. So it's a uniqueness of Israeli political life. It exists, this uniqueness, since the establishment of the State of Israel 75 years ago. Late David Ben-Gurion, our prime minister, had to work out a formula of cooperation, if you like, with religious parties, okay? It's very much unique to Israel, religious Jewish parties. However, we have our Charter of Independence, on which also members of our nation, of other minorities are signed, which prescribe for democratic and liberal society and state, with strong emphasis for democracy and the nature of the state as a Jewish state.
Jedno potpitanje. Kako to da se u Izraelu koji je, evo sad spominjete pojme liberalno, otvoreno, demokracija, živost političkog i društvenog života i tako dalje, je u ovom trenutku izraz političke volje Izraelaca zapravo jedna konzervativna vlada sa vrlo snažnim tim religijskim notama, da to kažem. Pri čemu, znate, ja nemam zazor od toga. Ja sam, isto znate, tako dobro, vrlo blizak Habadu, Miri Zaklasu i ja znam instant priču, dakle, tu nema riječi o konzervativizmu u ovom jednom negativnom smislu. To je zapravo tradicionalizam, zapravo. Dakle, ni na koji način ja ne osuđujem, niti govorim vrijednosno. Ali ipak je zanimljivo da s jedne strane stalno govorimo o liberalnoj noti izraelskog društva, a imamo konzervativnu vladu.
You know, you mentioned before the program of Dragan Milic, I think, yes?
Yeah.
What's Up Israel. I guess it will be, for the viewers of your program, will be to have a follow-up on that, because I think the extent of view of What's Up Israel, I think will dive a little bit deeper maybe in what I'm going to say. But to keep it shorter for our need right now, I would say Israel, what's happening in political life in Israel, it's unique, like every country political process to some extent are unique, but it reflects, uniqueness is reflected in the fact that since the establishment of the State of Israel, we are living under constant threat to our existence, which is thankful to most of the European countries after the Second World War, this threat disappeared. And secondly, the political life reflects also changing demography, okay? We are very much happy that our population, unlike in European countries, is constantly growing with very nice natural growth rate. But some parts of this demographic formula are changing all the time. And it means some parties become stronger because they represent bigger parts of population. This is the case, for instance, for religious parties. This is the case for some of the parties that present the interests of the settlers, and so on and so forth. So, but this is continuous progress or continuous change. But again, as I mentioned, there shouldn't be any concern. Definitely when you're looking on a political map of the Middle East for the strength and very much common belief in the need for democracy in the State of Israel.
Na Međunarodni dan sjećanja na Holokaust, sad smo već ipak dovoljno distancirani od tog datuma, desila se tragedija. Terorist je ubio 7 ljudi, bilo žrtava, nakon toga uslijedio još, dakle, napad i tako. Napetosti u tom trenutku, tih tjedana, govorilo se o novoj intifadi, ali koliko god ona bila izvjesna ili ne, činjenica jest da su odnosi Palestinaca i Izraelaca dosegli vrlo blizu točke ključanja. Kakva je perspektiva tih odnosa?
First of all, I will not deny there is a concern. There is a concern with the security situation, but we understand where it comes from. The moment you understand where it comes from, the moment that you know you have very strong security, a strong army, strong police, security service, one thing is sure, we cannot bow to terrorism. Okay, we cannot comply with terrorism. We cannot agree with terrorism. We cannot agree with extortion. Intifada, it's a word. It's nothing, you know. It doesn't mean that we don't have a concern, but we know what are the reasons. The reasons are incitement of the Palestinian Authority. Leave aside the terrorist organizations like Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad, who are openly calling for destruction of Israel. Okay, so as long as the incitement continues, unfortunately, the violence may continue as well. It's much more important that the people outside of Israel will come and will ask the Palestinian side, the Palestinian Authority, why they incite, why the books, why the education, the Palestinian official system calls for violence against the Jewish people of Israel. Okay, as long as there is disregard from this topic, we can rely on ourselves, okay? And we can deal with the situation. Yeah, it's unpleasant, yeah, it's challenging, but if this is the way the Palestinians are choosing, unfortunately, it will be tragic mostly for them.
Dvije stvari me još zanimaju kad je riječ o tome. Prva je vanjski utjecaj, naročito utjecaj Irana. Bi li taj sukob bio, naravno da bi on postojao, ali bi li on bio takav i bi li eskalirao da nije doljevanja ulja na vatru od strane Irana?
Excellent question. I mentioned before that part of the situation is bred, is created by incitement and decision, I would add, decision of the chairman of the Palestinian Authority to stop security coordination with the Israeli side. But there is another ingredient that you just asked me about, and this is Iranian involvement. Okay, of course, the biggest challenge for Israel is Iranian nuclear program and the open call of Iran for calling for destruction of the State of Israel. And as I mentioned before, the Iranian presence in Syria, but also Iran stands behind the part of the Palestinian society which is led mostly by Hamas, Islamist organization, and Palestinian Islamic Jihad. These organizations were supported and are supported. It was through smuggling of weaponry in the past, or financial support. They're supported, and they represent the core of rejectionism which exists on the Palestinian side, unfortunately. And it serves the interest of Iran for creation of instability.
Jedno potpitanje, rekao sam da postoji drugi aspekt. Sa kim zapravo trebate razgovarati kad spominjete Hamas? Kad zapravo druga strana nije jedinstvena?
Well,
ima li bilo koji dogovor smisla?
That's something that we are hard trying to explain to our friends. Sometimes the issues, it's like in a family, you know. One thing you know who is your enemy, who is your foe, but the other thing you know who are your friends. And friends, our friends in the West, expecting us to renew the peace process, the negotiations. But there is no one to speak, okay? Especially when the Palestinian side is divided between clear-cut extremists supported by Iran, that I already mentioned, Hamas, ruling Gaza. Since we left Gaza, they have a full rule there. And the people are suffering, Palestinians suffering mostly because of them. And the other side is Palestinian Authority, who is waging diplomatic war against Israel in the United Nations, in other places. So should we speak with them? I think we should wait probably for a new leadership, much more pragmatic, much more realistic to come.
Ja sam u jednoj svojoj socijalnoj ulozi član, dakle, jednog europskog udruženja Židova koje se, eto, odvažilo angažirati me da u ovom prostoru se bavim, između ostaloga, borbom protiv antisemitizma. I znam vrlo dobro koliki je razmjer. Nisam znao, vjerujte mi, dok nisam počeo se družiti sa tim kolegama iz raznih zemalja Europe, pa od Skandinavije do Francuske, od Francuske do Španjolske, nisam znao koji je razmjer toga, recimo, u zapadnoj Europi. Kako vi vidite taj rastući antisemitizam u Europi koji je različite etiologije, različitog karaktera? Jedan možemo pripisati ovim migracijama, ali drugi je stari, korijeniti antisemitizam u Europi koji kao ponornica je tu pa izađe na površinu.
Yeah. Well, the phenomena exists. I mean, it will be not wise to disregard the situation. It's disturbing because it happens in well-developed countries, in strong democracies, and one can expect of those countries, especially in Europe or in the West in general, to give a decent fight to this situation, to this hate, to this incitement also against the Jewish communities. It frankly doesn't really matter to explain why, although definitely some scholars saying it's divided between the radical, so-called progressive left, which sometimes criticize anti-Semitically the Jews for their support of the State of Israel, to radical right, okay, including different neo-fascists and so on. And as you mentioned correctly, unfortunately, and I'm not trying to generalize, there are some parts of the communities that arrived to Europe in the last decades that brought with them maybe some elements of lack of tolerance towards different Jews who were living in Europe, and they still live for millennia. We were part of Europe. We contributed to Europe very much, I mean, the Jewish people. The newcomers, okay, some of them are radicalized, okay? And it creates a violence, and unfortunately, violence of this part of the anti-Semitism, the new anti-Semitism in Europe, is the most dangerous. The answer is more interesting. 2 decades ago, IHRA was established, International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, which basically has 35 members right now, if I'm not wrong, and some member states as observers, they defined what's the meaning of anti-Semitism in order to put aside any disagreements, which is legitimate, which is not legitimate. Is it possible, for instance, in the case of Israel? We are not against criticism, but the moment we see that the double standards, especially from the left side, then it's basically anti-Semitism, something that you expect of us. Okay, a country which is struggling for its survival since the day of its establishment, and you don't expect of Palestinians or the Arab states, for instance, democracy or equal rights for the women and so on and so forth. It means you have a hidden agenda, and it's almost always anti-Semitic. Okay?
Kako komentirate današnje, sadašnje bilateralne odnose Izraela, države Izrael i Republike Hrvatske?
I would say very good, excellent to some extent. This morning, today, I had just to give you an example, two events. I had a very good meeting with the Minister of Agriculture of Republic of Croatia. We discussed continuation, different projects that were launched, the ideas that were launched by my predecessor, Ambassador Moore, and some other ways of cooperation. Israel was very strong, considered to be very strong, and I'm proud of it, in the field of agriculture. And before that, we launched together with our Croatian friends a seminar in another important field in modern life, cyber defense, cyber security. So this morning we had few dozens of people, including government representatives and companies of Croatian side, and we are working on strengthening cooperation in this field, which can impact everyone, every citizen of our country and your country.
Mi ove godine Hrvatska, dakle, preuzima predsjedanjem IHRA-om, dakle, i nedavno je naša vlada usvojila radnu definiciju. Tu je, dakle, riječ o antisemitizmu, njegovom poricanju, iskrivljavanju holokausta, antiromskom rasizmu i tako dalje. Što to praktički znači za Hrvatsku?
First of all, I would like to reiterate that it's not a matter of being thankful. It's a matter of something that is expected of member states of this alliance, an important international forum, IHRA, but definitely of a country that is going to take the lead as a rotational presidency of IHRA. And it's a great thing, it's an important thing, because there are many other countries that haven't adopted yet. So I think Croatia, in this sense, gives a positive example. However, Croatia is also, there is a responsibility in the sense that Croatia will lead this important international forum for a full year as of 1st of March. It's not just about hosting two plenaries, one in Dubrovnik, one in Zagreb, procedural events, so on. It's also to lead the international effort to fight this scourge of anti-Semitism internationally. For instance, we spoke before that we spoke about cyber. Internet creates not only cyber threats, it's a place for haters. It's a place where hate crimes, not only against Jews, okay, are easily bred, easily disseminated behind the wall of anonymity. It's something that it's a continuous combat, if you like, that every country has to do internally, but also to lead this effort internationally, vis-a-vis companies like providers, whether it's TikTok, Facebook, Twitter, or internet in general, okay? Of course, the other side of this equation is not only the international effort, but also internal. It's an opportunity for Croatia to improve things which are connected to commemoration, to fighting. We were speaking about anti-Semitism. Adoption is the first layer of the definition. Second layer is basically incorporating this. And there is a strong commitment on behalf of the Croatian government to do it with the judges, with the prosecutors, with the policemen. The people will be able to distinguish and understand if the crime, for instance, is, on a so-called regular criminal basis or it's anti-Semitic.
Ekscelencija, ali ima takvih primjera jako lijepih i u prevenciji toga. Mislim da vi poznajete osobno rektora Ljutića. Evo, ja sam sam sudjelovao u tome. Pa sam predstavio gospodinu Ljutiću dakle, tu definiciju i Splitski univerzitet je prvi, odmah dan nakon, u 12 sati, evo Dragan Ljutić, mi smo prijatelji, rekao Romano, evo, mi smo to imali na Senatu i to je potpisano. Hoću kazati, znate, problemi na kampusima, vama je to poznato, naš publici je manje poznato, širom Evrope su veliki. Lijepo je da se tako nešto događa u Hrvatskoj.
I'm very thankful for you for raising this issue.
To mi je posao, ne mora.
First of all, because it's, if it comes from inside, if it comes from different organizations, I would say on voluntary basis or out of real realization, the importance of this issue, then I can only applaud. Me and my colleagues, it's not only State of Israel, by the way. There is a big diplomatic community here of other ambassadors, of other countries, of your neighbors, not only in European Union, otherwise, that are also watching. And we are very much thankful to Rector Lutic. I was already twice in the university, and I very much appreciate your personal involvement as well. So it's a good example. I hope, if I may just raise a hope, it's to some extent our business, not our business. I can hope that the example of Split University, other universities will follow.
Već je to u izradi. Slijedit će vrlo brzo i novi potpisi. Recite, s druge strane, imali smo ovdje baš slajd židovske općine, pa neke se vrati, jer je pitanje usko povezano. Kako će, na koji način ovo uključivanje, dakle, hrvatske vlade, dakle, pri pomoći samo židovskoj zajednici? Jeste li razgovarali sa zajednicom?
Oh, yeah, sure. As I mentioned before about the uniqueness of Israeli diplomacy, maybe we are always caring about the interest of the Jewish community. However, they are citizens of the Republic of Croatia, and they have a constant contact with the government and different officials. I met a few times with different representatives, of course, with Professor Kraus. A few weeks ago, when we had a delegation from Israel, of our co-heads of our delegation to IHRA, we also met in the community. We had different views, different ideas, different suggestions, and of course, very much also hear it from officials of Croatian government. It's attentive. There are issues that should be taken care in order to reflect the legitimate interests of the Jewish community. Many fields: commemoration, restitution, education, so on and so forth.
Sad ste spomenuli ta pitanja kojima se sama zajednica bavi. Jedna od presudnih koja pereniraju kroz desetljeća. U Jugoslaviji se to nije ni komentiralo, a ni danas se ne komentira jer se pokušava zapravo prešutjeti taj period u kojem se i nakon NDH zapravo dovodila židovska zajednica i sami židovi u vrlo neugodnu situaciju da zbog dvojnog državljanstva ne mogu više imati nekretninu u Hrvatskoj, tako da se na jedan vrlo perfidan način ljude lišavalo imovine. Kako je sa tim povratkom židovske imovine u Hrvatskoj? Naročito naravno one koje je u NDH oduzeta naravno tijekom tih 4 godine.
I can tell you that I raised this matter with the Minister of Justice. There was in the past some progress made. I'm not an expert on Croatian legislation, of course, very much, but there are still things to do. It's important for people to realize that 80% of the Jewish population of pre-war Croatia was exterminated, okay, brutally. Some of them survived. Some of them tried to claim, as you mentioned, during Yugoslav period of time, it wasn't probably possible very much, not for Jews and maybe not for others as well. Most of the private property is what we call property without heirs, because all the families perished in the Holocaust. There are ways to deal with it. Some countries establish special funds. Those funds can be used to support communities, to support upkeep of Jewish cemeteries, to upkeep of synagogues, to rebuild things. Something that probably Croatian government will have to consider. Then there is a private property that you can prove who are the heirs. Something should be done. Then there is a communal property. Very obvious case in Zagreb is the place, the parking lot on Praška, where the synagogue that was destroyed by Ustaša at the beginning of the war. So something should be done. Of course, me, as a State of Israel, we will only support any effort which will be done in close cooperation with the Jewish community, between the government, maybe municipal authorities, and it's just one example. There are still issues. I think it's an opportunity also to remark in a very positive way, of course, the beginning of process of dealing with the looted art. Okay, MOU was signed, Memorandum of Understanding was signed between the Croatian side and World Jewish Restitution Organization last autumn. It's a good process. Hopefully we will see some fruits. Also, of course, very much during the presidency of Croatia. It will be more than usual or normal that such concrete steps will take place.
I za kraj jedno pitanje koje će možda biti neobičajeno. Kad ste preuzimali dužnost, sigurno ste imali razgovore sa gospodinom Morom i tako dalje, pitao sam na početku emisije za vaš dojam, ali što je bila sugestija, kakva je atmosfera u Hrvatskoj i što bi trebalo popraviti da se ljudi osjećaju komotnije, bolje, relaksiranije, dakle da Židovi u Hrvatskoj na minimalan način ili na neznatan način naprosto osjećaju bilo kakav teret života, mislim, u zemlji koja ipak ima to sjećanje na show, na genocid.
Yeah, well, I think there are issues that it's very hard to fix, if you like. The mere fact that the size of the community, Jewish community, speaking now about Jewish community, but I wanted maybe to finish with the general observation of relations. When it comes to Jewish community, it's very small. Okay, it's very small, and the factor which exists in many countries in the world of mixed marriages make things even more difficult, more challenging. There are parts of the community that feel that the need of preservation of Jewish tradition, Jewish history, is a way to preserve their personal identity, not only as a Croats, but also people of Jewish origin. And this is commendable. This is very positive. Others, it's a personal decision. There is no place for the State of Israel in this sense. What we do, we are saying, wherever you live, if you don't feel comfortable, you want that your children will be educated in a country that you will feel much more at home, Israel is open to any Jewish person to come, to get citizenship, to move to Israel. That's what my parents did when they decided to leave the glorious Soviet Union back in '73. Also because of the anti-Semitism, but not only. On a general, there is always place for improvement. when we speak about our relations. I think what in the modern world plays a significant role is open societies, open skies. It's an opportunity of people to travel, to visit each country. I think, again, Goran Milic is getting a lot of credit during our conversation. I think it's for those Croats who haven't visited in Israel, I think this serial will give an opportunity to consider. And I'm equally calling to Israelis to come and visit your beautiful country of Croatia. Israelis like very much to travel, to discover new destinations. Maybe a few dozens of thousands already did it, not only once. Croatia, it's a nice location, not the most cheap one, but it's close. And hopefully soon we will have direct flights. A new season is coming. So I would like maybe to call for, first of all, for Croats, because I'm mostly interested for incoming tourism to Israel, to visit our country, to discover through your own eyes, to understand better what makes us tick there. Of course, but we live normal life, despite the security situation, despite the threats that Israel is facing. It's a strong, vibrant country, strong democracy, strong economy, strong military, strong intelligence, high-tech, innovation, startup nation. We can cooperate. There are a lot of perspective for cooperation between our countries, level of governments, but also level of private business, artists, universities. Sky's the limit.
Hvala vam lijepo. Evo, na početku vašeg mandata u Hrvatskoj imali smo ovaj razgovor. Vjerujem da ćemo se sretati kroz ove godine u kojima ćete biti u Hrvatskoj. Dobro nam došli i svaki put ćete biti dobro došli u studiju.
Hvala vam.
Hvala vama. Dragi gledatelji, hvala lijepo na vašem vremenu. Gledajte nas i sljedećeg utorka. Do tada, doviđenja.